Welcome to GST section wise reference. Section 1 Short title, extent, and commencement. This act may be called the Central Goods and Service Tax Act 2017. It extends to whole of India. It shall come into force on such date as the central government may by notification in the official gazette appoint, provided that different dates may be appointed for different provisions of this act, and any reference in any such provision to the commencement of the act shall be construed as a reference to coming into force of that provision. Section 2, we have various definitions in Section 2. Section 3, officers under this act. The government shall, by notification, appoint the following class of officers for the purpose of act, namely, principal. So you can see all chief, principal chief, and there is another directors related. In principal chiefs, you can see principal chief commissioner of central tax, chief commissioner of central tax, principal commissioner of central tax, commissioner of central tax, additional commissioner of central tax, joint commissioner of central tax, deputy commissioner of central tax, assistant commissioner of central tax. In parallelly, I will read commissioners along with directors. Principal Chief Commissioner of Central Tax or Principal Director General of Central Tax, Chief Commissioner of Central Tax or Director General of Central Tax, Principal Commissioner of Central Tax uh, or Principal Additional Director General of Central Tax, Commissioner of Central Tax or Additional Director General of Central Tax, Additional Commissioner of Central Tax or Additional Director of Central Tax, Joint Commissioner of Central Tax or Joint Director of Central Tax, Deputy Commissioner of Central Tax or Deputy Director of Central Tax, Assistant Commissioner of Central Tax or Assistant Director of Central Tax, and any other class of officers as it may deem fit, provided that officers appointed under Central Excise Act 1944 one of 1944 shall be deemed to be officers under the provisions of this act. Section 4 Appointment of officers. The board may, in addition to the officers, as may be notified by the government under Section 3, appoint such persons as it may think fit to be the officers under this act. Without prejudice to the provisions of subsection 1, the board may, by order, authorize any officers referred to in clauses A to H of Section 3 to appoint officers of Central Tax below the rank of Assistant Commissioner of Central Tax for the administration. So what we are trying to tell is the board may, in addition to the officers, as may be notified by government under Section 3, which is this section. So these officers will be notified, appoint such person as it may think to be the officers under this act. Without prejudice to the provisions of subsection 1, the board may, by order, authorize any officer referred to in clause A to H of section 3, A to H, so which is up till assistant commissioner, to appoint the officers of central tax below the rank of assistant commissioner of the central tax for the administration of this act. Under section 5, powers of officers under GST. Subject to such conditions and limitations by as the board may impose, an officer of central tax may exercise the power and discharge the duties conferred to or imposed on him under this act. An officer of central tax may exercise the power and discharge the duties conferred or imposed under this act or any other officers of central tax who is subordinate to him. The commissioner may, subject to such conditions and limitations as may be specified in this behalf, delegate his powers to any other officers who is subordinate to him. Notwithstanding anything contained in this section, an appellate authority shall not exercise the power and discharge the duties conferred or imposed on any of other officer of central tax. Section 6. Authorization of officers of state tax or union territory tax as proper officer in certain circumstances. So what we can do is SGST officers can be CGST officers. Without prejudice to the provisions of this act, the officer appointed under SG state goods and service tax or union territory goods and service tax are authorized to be the proper officers for the purpose of this act, subject to such conditions as the government shall on the recommendation of the council by notification specify, subject to the conditions specified in the notification issued under subsection 1, where any um, proper officer issues an order under this act, he shall also issue an order under State Goods and Service Tax Act or Territory Goods and Service Tax Act as authorized by the State Goods and Service Tax Act or Union Territory Goods and Service Tax Act, as the case may be, under intimation to the jurisdictional officer of state tax or union territory tax, where a proper officer under the State Goods and Service Tax Act or Union Territory Service Tax Act has initiated any proceedings on a subject matter, no proceeding shall be initiated by proper officer under this act on the same subject. Any proceedings for rectification, appeal, and revision, wherever applicable, of any order passed by an officer appointed under this act shall not lie before an officer appointed under State Goods and Service Tax Act or Union Good Territory Goods and Service Tax Act. Very important section, scope of supply. For the purpose of this act, the expression supply includes all forms of supply of goods or services or both, such as sale, transfer, barter, exchange, license, rental, lease, disposal, made or agreed to be made for consideration by a person in the course of furtherance of the business. The activities or transactions by a person other than individual to its members or constituents or vice versa for cash, deferred payments, or other valuable consideration. Explanation. For the purpose of this clause, it is hereby clarified that nothing, notwithstanding anything contained in any other law for the time being in force or any judgment, decree, or order, or court, tribunal, or authority, the person and its members or constituents shall be deemed to be two separate persons. Shall be deemed to be two separate persons, and the supply of activities or transactions interstate shall be deemed to be to take place from one person to another. Import of services for consideration whether or not in the course or furtherance of the business the activity specified in Schedule 1 made or agreed to be made without a consideration. Where certain activities or transactions constitute a supply in accordance with the provisions of subsection 1, they shall be treated either as supply of goods or supply of services as referred in Schedule 2. Notwithstanding anything contained in subsection 1, activities or transactions specified in Schedule 3, such activities or transactions undertaken by central government, state government, or local authority in which they are engaged as public authorities as may be notified by the government on the recommendations of the council shall be treated neither as supply of goods nor as supply of services, subject to the provisions of the government may, on the recommendation of the council, specify by notification the transactions that are to be treated as supply of goods, not as supply of services, a supply of services, not as supply of goods. Tax liability on composite and mixed supply. The tax liability on composite and mixed supply shall be determined in the following manner, namely, a composite supply comprising two or more supplies, one of which is a principal supply, shall be treated as a supply of principal supply, and a mixed supply comprising two or more supplies shall be treated as a supply, that particular supply which attracts highest rate of tax. Levy and collection. Subject to the provisions of subsection 2, there shall be levied a tax called the central goods and service tax on all intrastate supply of goods or services or both, except on the alcoholic liquor for human consumption and denatured alcohol, extra neutral alcohol, uh, or rectified spirit used for the manufacture of alcoholic liquor for human consumption on the value determined under section 15 and at such rates not exceeding 20%, as may be notified by the central government on the recommendation of the council, collected in such manner as may be prescribed and shall be paid by the taxable person. The central tax on the recommendation of petroleum crude, high speed diesel, motor spirit, commonly known as petrol, natural gas, aviation turbine fuel shall be levied with effect from such date as may be notified by the government on the recommendations of the council. The government may, on the recommendation of the council, by notification, specify categories of such supply of goods or services or both the tax on which shall be paid on reverse charge by the recipient of such goods and services. The government may, on recommendation of the council, by notification, specify categories of supply of goods or services, or both the tax on which shall be paid on reverse charge basis by recipient of such goods or services, or both, and all the provisions of this act shall apply to as the recipient of supply of goods or services, or both, and all the provisions of this act shall apply to such recipient as if he is the person liable for paying the tax in relation to supply of goods or services, or both. The government may, on the recommendation of the council, by notification specify categories of services, the tax on intrastate supplies of which shall be paid by electronic commerce operator if such services are supplied through it, and all the provisions of the act shall apply to electronic commerce operator as if he is the supplier for paying the tax to supply of such services, provided where any electronic commerce operator physical does not have physical presence in the taxable territory, any person representing such electronic commerce operator for any purpose shall be liable to pay tax. Provided further that where any electronic commerce operator does not have physical presence in taxable territory, also he does not have a representative in the said territory, such electronic commerce operator shall appoint a person in the taxable territory for the purpose of paying tax, and such person shall be liable to pay tax. Section 10, composition sub levy. Notwithstanding anything contrary contained in this act, but subject to the provisions of subsection 3 and 4 of section 9, a registered person whose aggregate turnover in the prescribed financial year did not exceed 50 lakhs rupees. 50 lakhs rupees may opt to pay in lieu of tax payable by him under subsection 1 of section 9 an amount of tax calculated at such rate as may be prescribed, but not exceeding 1% of the turnover in state and turnover of union territory in case of manufacture, 2.5% of turnover in state or turnover in union territory in case of person engaged in the supplies referred to in clause B of paragraph 6 of schedule 2, and half percent of turnover in state or turnover in union territory in case of other supplies subject to such conditions and restrictions as may be prescribed, provided that government may by notification increase the said limit of 50 lakhs to such higher amount not exceeding 1 crore 50 lakhs rupees as may be recommended by the council, provided further that a person who opts to pay tax under Clause A or Clause B or Clause C may supply services other than those referred to in Clause B of paragraph 6 of Schedule 2 of value not exceeding 10% of the turnover in state union territory in the preceding financial year, or 5 lakhs, whichever is higher, For the purpose of second provision, the value of exempt supply of services provided by way of extending deposits, loans, or advances insofar as the consideration is represented by way of interest or discount shall not be taken into account for determining the value of turnover in the state or union territory. Section 10 Composition Levy. Notwithstanding anything to the contrary contained in this Act, but subject to the provisions of subsection 3 or 4 and 4 of Section 9, a registered person not eligible to opt to pay tax under subsection 1 and subsection 2, whose aggregate turnover in the preceding financial year did not exceed 50 lakhs rupees, may opt to pay in lieu of tax payable by him under subsection 9 an amount of tax calculated at such rate as may be prescribed but not exceeding 3% of the turnover in the state or turnover in union territory if he is not engaged in making any supply of goods or services which is not leviable to tax under this act, engaged in making any interstate outward supply of goods or services, engaged in making any supply through electronic commerce operator who is required to collect tax at source under section 52, a manufacturer of such goods or supplier of such services as may be notified by the government on the recommendation of the council, a casual taxable person or non-resident taxable person, provided that where more than one registered person are having the same PAN issued under the Income Tax Act 1961, the registered person shall not be eligible to opt for the scheme under this section unless all registered person opt to pay under this subsection. The option availed of by registered person under section subsection 1, as the case may be, shall lapse with effect from the day on which aggregate turnover during financial year exceeds the limits specified under section subsection 1. A taxable person to whom the provisions of subsection 1 or the case may be apply shall not collect any tax from the recipient on supplies made by him, nor shall he be entitled to any credit of input tax. If any officer has reasons to believe that a taxable person has paid tax under section despite not being eligible, such person shall, in addition to any tax that may be payable by him under any of the provisions of this act, shall be liable to penalty and provisions of section 73 and 74. Shall mutatis mutandis apply for determination of tax and penalty. Explanation 1. For the purpose of computing aggregate turnover of a person for determining his eligibility to pay tax under this section, the expression aggregate turnover shall include the value of supplies made by such person from first day of April of financial year up to the date when he becomes liable for registration under this act, but shall not include the value exempt of services provided by way of extending deposits, loans insofar as the consideration is represented by way of interest and discount. For the purpose of determining the tax payable by a person under this section, the expression the turnover in state or union territory, turnover in union territory shall not include the value of supplies, namely supplies from first day of April of financial year up to the date when such person becomes liable for registration under this act, and exempt supply of services provided by way of extending deposits, loans, advances insofar as the consideration is represented by way of interest and discount.